All right, hey there, Ruckus Makers. Excited to have Daniel Pascoe Aguilar, PhD in MDiv, join me today. And Daniel is a passionate leader, and he's passionate about problem solving, collaborating with students, alums, the university community, and community organizations on meaningful partnerships and innovative strategies for the development of a diverse, purpose driven, interculturally sensitive, and systemic challenge ready next generation of leaders. Currently, Daniel is Excelsior University's CDO and founding director of the Center for Social Justice. Before this, Daniel served in career development, DEI, crisis services, and spiritual development leadership roles at diverse universities and organizations in Mexico and the US. Daniel has a PhD and a master's from Indiana University and an MDiv from Palmer Theological Seminary and a bachelor's in industrial design from Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana in Mexico. So, Daniel, welcome to the show.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm honored.
It's brilliant to have you here, and I'm so excited to have somebody with your credentials and expertise and vast experience too. I'm gonna withhold my curiosity. Tell me about industrial design and all this and crisis services, right? Like that's I didn't know that about your bio, but let's start with your story, right? You grew up as a student in Mexico, and you're dyslexic, so your school experience, I'm sure, was quite interesting, maybe challenging. But can you tell me about that school experience?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it was unique in that at that time, maybe I'm dating myself, and in Mexico, that was not something that institutions could diagnose.
Yeah. Okay.
So the assumption was that I was either lazy or not very smart, and
Mm.
unfortunately, at some point, I started to believe it. So it was a challenging journey, um, but it was an important one to realize the opportunity um, to survive challenge. Right?
Mm.
And
Right.
I mean, what that meant is that the educational system was not designed for me. Like in the United States, for example, right now we have 20% of students who are dyslexic, according to research. And the learning process is different than the traditional one.
Mm.
So learning has to be circumvented. And I was very lucky that I was during my um, education, my elementary and middle and high school education, I was very involved in a community, in a religious community, where I was able to explore leadership through art and um, through programming and leading groups. And that really turned my life um, to the better, right? And I was able to see the value that I could bring to organizations. I was able to see that even the strength that dyslexia could bring to my functioning and my contributions. So it was a very interesting experience going through the challenge, identifying opportunities, and getting really creative to use them so that I could grow and so that I could contribute.
Right. And I can think of many off the top of my head. I'll just Richard Branson, I think, is one, but there's plenty of entrepreneurs who have been incredibly successful and are dyslexic because they have to figure out ways to, navigate the world, right? Despite the challenges of the written word and text on a page. But you were getting these negative, messages, and then it sounds like you were plugged into some powerful organizations that allowed you to figure it out. Would you say that that's what helped you pivot from some of these negative messages you were hearing in school, or was it something else?
Absolutely. Yeah, because really, at least me as someone who experiences dyslexia, my intuition is off charts, and I learned through making connections and through um, seeing the big picture and through playing with things, right? Rather than sitting and reading a book or looking at equations. So that ability that I had to go through growth and development through trial and error in an environment that was less academic ended up being a redemptive opportunity for me. And I mean, which is a reminder, based on what we're discussing today, of how any education we facilitate should always make sure to include both ways or a diversity of ways of learning. Things like
Mm,
universal design for learning, and assuming that you have a number of learners that need a unique way in which they can understand, they can apply, they can even become engaged in their learning.
right. Talk to me a bit about intuition, because I think that obviously, it's a skill that served you well, but it serves ruckus makers, leaders well when they learn to trust their gut. But for whatever reason, folks might be uncomfortable; they don't trust themselves or whatever. But tell me a bit about your process of learning to trust your intuition.
Oh, it's definitely been a very important part of my life. Like I have done music, for example, for a long time.
Mm,
I have written music. I record music. Now I'm singing classical music and recording it. Um, I mean, a lot of it is based on those connections that my mind makes automatically. I
mhm,
think what's very important in at least in the work that I have, and as I think of how to improve education, is to use that intuition and to elicit and leverage that intuition in our students to help them grow and learn. Like how many times have we heard students saying, "I hate math," right? Or
right.
"I hate," and but then they go out the next 5 minutes and they're like having the best time of their life playing a sport, and they don't realize it's all physics and math. Right? And if we have the opportunity to connect the dots for them, and we elicit that energy, right, and that intrinsic motivation through the intuition that they that they have themselves, it's such an
Mm.
important way of understanding how to facilitate learning.
Yeah, and I'm thinking of my wife too. And honestly, it was the quality of teachers she saw earlier in her academic career where she didn't think she was good at math, right? But then she, arrived at a university campus, started taking these courses and exploring and this kind of thing. She's now a PhD, right? She's in public health. She's an epidemiologist, and she does runs all these numbers and different models and is, looking at stats all the time and making meaning from the data that she sees. And she's a math whiz. But if she never
Exactly.
had that experience, right, in the post secondary experience, she would have thought, I'm bad at math, right? So, man, we really have to be careful about folks that sometimes don't come to our school in like a traditional package, right? And
Exactly.
maybe you could speak a bit about the challenge of missing the brilliance of our students when they might show up in a less traditional package, so to speak.
Yeah, excellent wording. I think um, to me, the major challenge in the story you were telling, in the story that I experienced, in the story of many of our students, um, whether in their earlier years or in post secondary education, is the risk of missing their brilliance. Like, here's the bottom line: we need and you mentioned it earlier, we need a next generation of leaders that is diverse, that is authentic, that is engaged, and that is ready. And we know that our strength as a human race comes from our diversity, right? Like you want to put the best team to solve a problem or to innovate, you want to bring them from different disciplines and different backgrounds, and you want them to bring different perspectives and ideas and skills, right? The collection is the one that develops the richness of our capacity. So the risk of us losing brilliance because of a misunderstanding like that, right, is very scary. Is actually upsetting to think that it might have happened so many times, and it is an opportunity for us to rethink education altogether. Rethink how we facilitate learning, because I think that our job is to finding that spark, right? That approach that allows someone to thrive and to see the power of learning and then take it to the nth level, right? The nth potential. Um, there are many who have. Unfortunately, I know that there are many who haven't. And it's never too late. Right? We need to figure out ways of focusing on that.
In my leadership community, which I call the Ruckus Maker Mastermind, we actually don't teach anything content wise related to education. And it's because we want to leverage the diversity of awesome mental models and different ways of leading, right, from industries all around, and then bridge the gap, right? What does it mean to do this in education so that our leaders are built a little more robustly? So you were talking about leadership development, and I know Excelsior University is doing some pretty cool things. So, how are you helping facilitate that next generation of leaders?
Um, well, Excelsior has a very interesting history in that it became an institution as an opportunity to offer those in the community who hadn't had a chance to complete their education with credit aggregation, right? So it was a solution to a gap, and that has developed now that Excelsior is a nonprofit higher education institution. Has a very powerful mission of focusing on supporting the historically underrepresented in the community. And keep in mind, Excelsior University, by design, is an online institution. It allows students to learn at their own time, place, and pace. Right. So, I mean, picture you have a single parent who
Right.
might only be able to engage in their coursework at 11 o'clock after their kids are asleep on a Thursday night, right? And the ability to do that, to go through their education uh, even asynchronously, right? And taking advantage of the access they have to space and to time and to do it at their place. And then, of course, through wraparound support mechanisms that understand the realities that our students face. That to me is a very powerful aspect of Excelsior. That's one of the reasons for which I decided to join Excelsior, and I'm honored that they saw value in me bringing um, what I offer to the institution. Um, but it's, I think, to think of the bigger picture, I think it's also a reminder of how, part of our responsibility in the as leaders of educational systems is to find ways to make education accessible to everyone.
Yeah. Right. And, whether it's developing the next generation of leaders, meeting them where they're at, and having an asynchronous model or flexibility within the schedule, that kind of thing, to me, it sounds like seeing the humanity in others, and I don't know why. Maybe it's stress or just time in the classroom or whatever, but sometimes we forget, like, these students, these are humans, and they do have brilliance and this kind of stuff, but we forget that special quality that they bring. How can we have that paradigm shift and remind ourselves, like, there's humanity here, there's dignity, you know what I mean? What do you have to say about that?
Such an important question. Thank you, Danny.
Hmm.
So, a couple of things. Many authors have really stressed in a very eloquent way the need for us to focus on seeing the humanity in others. You have John Powell, Heather McGhee, Milton Bennett. I actually had the opportunity to work with Dr. Bennett. He developed this very powerful model, the developmental model of intercultural sensitivity.
Okay.
And his model is really interesting. It helps you map where you are in your intercultural development and how you can grow and be more inclusive and equitable, or more intercultural sensitive when experiencing difference. But one day I had the opportunity to ask him about the premise of his model. And he said it's actually quite simple. It's based on the observation that as human beings, we have the tendency to think of ourselves as highly complex individuals. That
Okay.
if you ask me who I am, I'm going to tell you about my family and about our health and our finances and our education and our careers and everything that makes me happy and keeps me up at night becomes this cloud of complexity. He said the observation unfortunately continues in identifying that as human beings, we also have the tendency to see others as less complex than us. And that the more different they are, particularly we're afraid or have a challenge understanding the difference, the
Hmm.
less we have the tendency to see complexity in them. So, in other words, we simplify, right,
Hmm.
others. Um, and I can, I mean, I've tried this since I learned that. and it's been a very interesting realization to see that even with the people I love, right, I often tend to do that. So to me, it is about being able to approach others, assuming the same level of complexity in their experiences and in their perspective than in mine. And here's where the rubber meets the road, regardless of my ability to understand that experience. Because if I haven't walked those footsteps, how will I
Sure.
ever understand that experience?
Mm.
However, that doesn't mean that I cannot learn, grow, and do everything I can to level the plane for those who have a limitation of privilege in whatever area. So to me, I think you're completely right. Education should be an endeavor of us figuring out how to see the humanity in others. I mean, how often it is that we think of our students as people who need to learn from us. How much can we think of us learning from them, right?
Yes.
How
Yeah.
important it is to see that as a two-way street. And that can only happen if I am assuming that level of complexity, and therefore I become curious and interested and inquisitive. And I enter every space assuming that I am also going to learn.
Brilliant. Yeah, that reminds me of Freire's work and pedagogy of the oppressed, and teaching as a banking model versus meeting those brilliant humans where they're at, and seeing what they bring to the table as just a tremendous strength, and building the curriculum around those experiences. So
Exactly.
this is awesome. Well, Daniel, I'm loving our conversation. We're going to break here just for a second to get some messages in from our sponsors. And when we get back, I'd love to ask you about the communities that you're building at Excelsior. Learn how to successfully navigate change, shape your school's success, and empower your teams with Harvard's certificate in school management and leadership. Get online PD that fits your schedule. Courses include leading change, leading school strategy and innovation, leading people, and leading learning. You can apply today at betterleadersbetterschools.com/Harvard. School leaders know that productive student talk drives student learning, but the average teacher talks 75% of class time. Give your students more opportunities to learn in class by monitoring their talk time. Check out TeachFX for yourself, and you can get an incredible free pilot. I think it's 2 weeks, but double check on that if you go to teachfx.com/BLBS. And finally, today's show is proudly sponsored by Organized Binder, a program which gives students daily exposure to goal setting, reflective learning, time and task management, study strategies, organizational skills, and more. Organized Binder's color coded system is implemented by the teacher through parallel process with students, helping them create a predictable and dependable classroom routine. And best of all, they have a great new course on executive functioning if you go to organizedbinder.com/go to really learn how to supercharge your students' success. All right, and we're back with Daniel Pascoe Aguilar. This has been a fantastic conversation, and I'd like to invite you to talk about these communities you're developing at Excelsior University.
Thank you, Danny. Yeah, one of the, based on what we have been discussing, one of the, what I
Mm,
think is an obvious need for, or observation responsibility for us to, in which to engage, is that the development of next generation of leaders that is diverse, authentic, engaged, and ready is critical. Right? We have systemic challenges that we're not solving, and they are
mm,
beginning to change our reality. They're beginning to change life as we know it. And there are many, right? Global warming and international relations and social justice. I mean, there are like so many, and they're so systemic. They're affecting
mm,
all of us. So when we think of preparing our next generation, we cannot delegate that to anyone, right? It cannot be that, oh, higher education takes care of that, or it's that particular department that does that, or it is the student themselves that need to work on that. How ready, how engaged, how diverse, how authentic they are will determine our future and the future of our
mm,
children. No question about it, right? And I'm afraid that in many instances, the level of change necessary for us to begin to turn things around, to reach the tipping point for the better, might be too much for our current generations. We're waiting on a next generation that will have a different paradigm and will approach things differently. So to me, our job is involving every member, every stakeholder group of our communities to do this work. We cannot do it alone. Right? Everybody has to get involved. It matters to everyone. It will determine how our future looks like. So what we have done, I have done this at the last three institutions where I have been, is build what we call communities. Communities are pretty much support villages that we build around our students, and we build them focused on what matters to them. So we have industry-focused communities, like business management and leadership, or like health sciences, or like nursing, or like sustainability, right, or criminal
Sure.
justice, or but we also have what we call identity allyship communities. At Excelsior, we call them
Mm,
rope teams because we love the concept of in a rope team, you support others who might fall because you're connected with the rope. But if you fall, your team will catch you.
yeah.
And we have identity allyship rope teams like race and ethnicity, or gender and sexuality, or different abilities, or military and veterans. Or we have 9 of each. And what we do is 3 things. The rope teams are a web space, so you can go to communities.excelsior.edu, and what you'll be able to see is the 18, and in each of them there's curation of content, and there's feeding of content from multiple sources. So we centralize content, we integrate content, we make content interactive, and then what we facilitate is this 365 24/7 ability for students to connect with mentors
Mm,
in the community that matters to them, or
awesome.
see internships and jobs related to that, or resources, or blogs, or connect with folks, or tell their story, or see stories, or see spotlights, or um, find courses that are relevant to them, right, etc. um, like I have I can tell you stories of instances where students have come and said, I had no idea that my institution cared so much about who I am. Right? And I can see um, how, when I was going through my education, if I had had those, right, and
Mm,
I could find a mentor with whom I knew had gone through my similar experience, and who was ready to connect with me, and if I could do it on a Sunday night, right, and find them and connect and
yeah.
reach out
Powerful.
and yeah, so what we're trying to do is to develop these rope teams. The 2 other things that we do, of course, is involve every stakeholder of the community in the process. And then the third one is we do programming. So every
Mm,
community has events and conversations and communication that we make available to make sure that we are engaging everyone based on what is important to them.
right. And I know you're experimenting with a program you're calling Adelante. So can you tell us about that program?
Yes, we're very excited about right now it's in development, so it's in the design phase, um, but we're hoping to implement it in the near future. It's a program specifically designed to um, support the education of Spanish as a first language students.
Mm,
It is a bridge program that hopefully will give access to students who potentially might think higher education is not for me, or if they want higher education, they are struggling with not having enough English in order to engage in it. Um,
right.
so the opportunity here is to provide them with a combined English learning curriculum to prepare them for education in English in at Excelsior in the United States, simultaneous with beginning to take courses in Spanish in their field of interest. Right now, we're working on health services and business management, two pathways, um, but it might expand to more than that in the future. But the idea is then to help those who might not think that education is for them, or who might not be ready for it, to have access to it, so that we don't miss that brilliance, right? So that we
Hmm.
um, engage them in the leadership that we need in order to succeed.
Brilliant. So Daniel, if you could put a message on all school marquees around the world for a single day, what would your message be?
Um, Probably that success is collective.
Hmm.
That I think we have engaged a little too much in competition
Right.
without realizing that the stakes are very high and that our need and therefore our responsibility is um, to figure out how to diversify our next generation of leaders and therefore to facilitate education that is accessible to all and that allows for everyone to succeed. That success is not a zero sum process, but it is the sum of all, as Heather McGee calls it. And that when others succeed, we succeed. When we succeed, others succeed, right? And that we need to lift everyone in our communities in order to do better as organizations, as society, as countries, and as a planet.
As you can see back there, it's a little small, but the ruckus maker listening or watching always hears me say this. But basically, when you get better, everybody wins, right? And I'm super aligned with your marquee message. So thanks for sharing that. Daniel, what about your dream school? If you were building your dream school, you were not limited by any sort of resources. Your only constraint was your ability to dream and imagine. How would you build these? How would you build this dream school? What would be the three guiding principles?
Okay, so the three guiding principles I think would be access, integration, and customization. Um, I think we need to figure out a way to make education more accessible, right? I think many institutions, I think, have fallen into the assumption that the more prestige we build, right, and the more competition we make as part of the engagement process, the better the quality of our education. And I think we miss brilliance through that process and finding ways of helping the privileged support the ones who lack privilege, figuring out ways in which we diversify education so that we can engage everyone, so that everyone can thrive through educational experience, and so that everyone can apply that education in a way that allows them to lead, I think is very important. I would also focus on integration of the experience of our students. I think we fragment the student experience significantly. Often it seems like a scavenger hunt for them. And who loses? Who misses out? The ones
Mm.
first generation students, right? The students who don't come with the capital or with the awareness, but also integrating the community. As I was mentioning, this matters to everyone. So involving everyone on campus and off campus, and then very importantly, Danny, integrating everyone's perspective. We do better if we elicit and we
Yes.
leverage the diversity of perspectives and ideas and experiences and skills that everybody brings. Students and every single community member we can engage. And then at the end of the day, experience in education is the strongest if it is customizable, right? If I can see the value in what I'm doing, if I can do it in the way that works for me, right? If I can facilitate education that responds to the intrinsic motivation and the values and the goals and the objectives and the dreams of the people who are learning, the stronger it's going to be. So customizing the experience and customizing the outcomes of our students. This concept of standardized testing, I think, is a significant problem. As someone who grew up with dyslexia, I can tell you that that's never measured how much I know or how well I can perform, right?
Right.
And I think that we need to figure out a way to customize not only learning but also assessment to make it count for everyone.
We covered a lot of ground today, Daniel. Of everything we discussed, what's the one thing you want a ruckus maker to remember?
Remember, everyone else lives with as much complexity as we do.
Hmm.
Approach others assuming the same level of complexity, and therefore approach others to learn, to grow, approach others to open conversations. And if you notice that the conversation is not deep enough, as a panelist in one of the conferences I attended recently said, complicated. complicate the conversation so you can get to the depth that we need in order to learn about each other's complexity, grow, and do better.